Popeye the Sailor Meets Aladdin and His Wonderful Lamp is the film, the third of the great Popeye color two-reelers, and geez, it's 20 minutes. Wish me luck. Not that it's not an excellent picture. It is. It's underrated, in fact, and I'll try to address that issue. And this is Greg Ford. I'll credit myself, and here are the animation credits. Dave Tendler is the head animator and de facto director. William Sturm, Nick Tafuri, and here's a name that starts showing up more on the credits around this time during the Fleischer's Miami era, Reuben Grossman. I spoke to his son, Leonard, who gave me some stray factoids on Reuben Grossman, by the way. And here we go with the establishing shot. Behind the scenes, it's surprise pictures in a sort of modernistic touch, unlike the other two Popeye two-reelers, which played more like operettas, absurdist operettas. It turns out that Aladdin is a film within the film written by Olive Oyl, no less. This is a wonderful look for her, by the way, with the glasses and the usual fluttery limbs, the hands, multiple hands, the typewriter carriage flying off. Dave Tendler contributed many memorable Olive Oyl scenes. There's no denying it. I regard Tendler's stuff as a sort of bridge between the older Fleischer ethos, which he stayed very true to, one must say, but managed to combine that with ideas that were actually a little progressive or predictive. I mean, like, this somehow seems to prognosticate the cartoon within the cartoon framing device of Jones and Maltese and Scarlet Pumpernickel for Warner's, not to mention the film within the film of W.C. Fields and Never Give a Second Even Break or something like that. One nice effect of the structure is that it alibis the anomaly-type jokes that always crop up in these cartoons, the incongruous jokes, Popeye's junk shop, with an E at the end, and the, modern technology which gets stuck in. It's all alibied as a, Airsat's Hollywood version of an Arabian Nights tale right from the get-go. I'm going to open a chain store, says Jack Mercer as Popeye under his breath. And here comes Olive in her princess garb, parading by. The princess part is the part she gave herself, of course. Now, it's worth mentioning while this procession's going on that May Costel isn't providing the voice for Olive in this one. It's an alternate Olive, who worked before as Olive, Margie Hines. May Costel didn't want to go to Miami when the studio relocated there, which was also the excuse given for discontinuing the Betty Boop series, although it's also true that the Boops were getting a little stale at this point by the late 30s. And here's Popeye's reaction to Olive, leading to more under-the-breath muttering by Jack Mercer. Oh, a pretzel maker, huh? Okay, enter the villain, who's known as the Grand Wazir. He's not a familiar villain. Maybe that's the reason Aladdin is a little underappreciated. Everyone expects Bluto to be the heavy, to play the antagonist as he did in Sinbad or as Abu Hassan in 40 Thieves. And this character seems shaky at first, a little shaky, but he really does pay off well at the end. He turns into a great character. But that's probably not the reason people don't like this one as much anyway. I'll try to deal with that later.
A rub on this lamp will bring riches and fame. This lamp is well guarded.
This is good. Lives on the corner of Chow and Main. Now, maybe the Fleischer's artists are already waxing nostalgic for New York City at this point, now that they moved to Miami. It's pretty unlikely they're going to find a pretzel vendor or a chow mein joint in what was then the middle of nowhere in Miami. The general consensus is that after the Fleischers went south, the cartoons went south as well, but you certainly don't get a hint of that at this stage. I mean, I Am, Lovesick, Goonland, The Jeep, Mutiny Ain't Nice, and this one, I mean, these are some of the greatest ever. Oh, there's a nice musical theme there I want to hear. Now, here's an old-fashioned title card, like a silent movie intertitle, like the movie was conceived that way, which, of course, it wasn't. In fact, it's the only title card in the picture, so it's almost like a joke, really, part of the film within the film conceit. Now, the voice of the villain is supplied by Carl Meyer, the writer, storyboard artist, writer, Carl Meyer, beginning something of a tradition because he also does a voice in the Fleischer's second and last feature, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, as does the writer, Ted Pierce, the Warner's cartoon writer, who somehow commuted to Miami to also write stuff for the Fleischers. He does C. Bagley Beetle in Mr. Bug. A good idea, writers doing the voice acting. But if writers turn actors, actors could also turn writers, and Jack Mercer would eventually receive story credit on Popeye cartoons with Meyer back in New York later on.
I go, all the princess. Yes, Aladdin. Go on.
Now here you see with Popeye's extended leave taking here, he's doing these poses, declamatory readings. It's very much the kind of stop and start posy animation that Tendler favored. He goes, I go, I'm gone. Now here's the big Cave of Riches scene. You know, the background functions beautifully, I think, but they're very drawn looking, aren't they? You know, they're drawn looking, linear, but very effective, but outlining. So unlike the elaborate 3D stereoptical like that, very outlining, different from the 3D stereoptical backgrounds that you saw in the earlier Popeye two-reelers, Sinbad and 40 Thieves. And part of the appeal of the earlier two-reelers is their archaic, exotic quality, I think. Like you found them on some archaeological dig or something, and they boast beautiful, otherworldly techniques that never fully caught on in the industry, whereas the values of this film are harder to discern immediately because they intersect with a later style and actually predict things that were going to happen later, so they don't seem so distinctive. Sinbad and Alibaba had almost pageant-like musical numbers with several repeated choruses, and the action scenes were often done in long shot, like Popeye turning into a bowling ball to trying to bowl down the 40 Thieves, whereas this film has well-executed story construction that builds progressively. And the movie-type techniques like montage, close-ups, and camera angles, and we'll see it later. But it's hard to choose. I really like all three of the Popeye color two-reelers equally. You know, Dave Tendler made a Fleischer color classic in 1938, I think, the year before this. It seems so progressive when you look at it today, but I have no idea what effect it had on people when it was made. But it's called Hold It, and it's a pun on the idea of an animation hold, an actual animation hold. So the whole notion of stop and start and holds are incorporated into the very story of these cats singing on a backyard fence in the moonlight, and they sing a little song with the refrain, everybody hold, everybody hold, everybody hold. And each time at the word hold, the drawing freezes, and it could even be an in-between or something like that, and it freezes, revealing the scenes of the process, you know, behind the scenes. And it looks progressive when you see it today. Guys like Tendler were ahead of the curve, but worked so much within the institutions of the industry that they never got their due in cartoon history, I think. He was at Fleischer's and at Famous, and later, I don't know, at Hanna-Barbera Filmation. Jeez. You know, never advertised himself. Meanwhile, back at the cave, another crucial cast member is about to be introduced, the genie, who I've heard variously was based on Ed Wynn, Bert Lahr, Lou Lair. I even heard Hugh Herbert once, but I don't buy the Hugh Herbert thing at all. Doesn't matter anyway, because it isn't like an exact celebrity caricature. This is the guy who goes, you want something? He goes, you want something? William Sturm animated him, I think, but also extensively our mystery animator, Reuben Grossman, who was a good friend of Tendler's. As I say, his son Leonard was very nice to me, and I'm very grateful to him. He showed me all sorts of artifacts from the period he saved from his dad, and a lot of it centered around this genie character. Leonard claims his father even looked like the genie. Besides being an animator, Reuben Grossman later had a lengthy career as a comic book artist on DC Comics, but not the superhero series, but comics featuring now forgotten funny animals like Goofy Goose and Biggity Bear. And you look through these things, and the genie keeps reappearing in various guises. And here's the big gag with the corkscrew, the magic corkscrew, and the department store escalator results. Well, nice anachronism there. And it's not just any escalator, but the escalator from Macy's department store, which I guess you can tell from the color and the construction of it. Another example of sudden New York City nostalgia here. Main entrance all out. If you don't see what you want, rub for it. It's Prince. It's like the title of a song by Prince. But no, we're just going to have Popeye transformed into a prince with a song by Sammy Timberg, even better. Now, this repeated genie gag, you see he's shaving here. He's always caught in embarrassing moments, you know, and interrupted at inconvenient times. It's exactly like the Bugs Bunny cartoon by Robert McKimson with the genie voiced by Jim Backus. Same gag. It's called Aladdin's Lamp, and I've never gotten a satisfactory explanation for the duplication. The most logical explanation would be the Ted Pierce connection, because Ted Pierce worked both places. But the story, the McKimson cartoon, is attributed to Warren Foster, not Ted Pierce. So maybe they just stole it. I don't know. Talk about Dave Tendler cartoons being predictive of later films. The genie gags in the Warner's cartoons are slightly ruder, of course, like the genie's naked taking a bath, or the genie's trying to pitch woo to a Jeanette.
What can I do for you? I do almost anything you ask me to. I go and get that pot of gold.
Aha, the Sammy Timberg song, What Can I Do For You? I recently put together a festival of cartoons at Lincoln Center at Walter Reed called Cartoon Musicals. It's a rather wide-ranging program, obviously. And I could include the Betty Boop two-reeler Poor Cinderella, because that was like an operetta. And I could even rationalize including the first two Popeye color two-reelers, Sinbad and Alabama, because Bluto's all sung odes to his own villainy were reprised so often. As I said, you could rationalize them as musicals. But I couldn't include this one, much as I wanted to, because the story construction was much tighter, and you couldn't rationalize it as a musical. Now, it's common knowledge that the Fleischers made these extended play, Betty Boop, Poor Cinderella, the extended play, Sinbad, and Aladdin. And that's what convinced the studio bosses at Paramount to finally let the Fleischers make their first color sound feature color as travels. It's common knowledge, but it's wrong because it doesn't allow for the vagaries of the mindsets of the studio executives. You'd think Sinbad would have sold them because it was a huge hit, held over weeks at theaters above the live action film on the marquee and nominated for an Oscar. And there was a hunger for longer running animation, I think, and that's why Sinbad did better commercially than Alabama or this one. But they didn't act fast enough, and that void, that public craving, was more than filled by Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the meantime. Now, my friend Mark Langer, the cartoon historian and researcher, got the chance to actually pour through all the confidential Paramount memos and inter-office correspondence from the period, most of which survived, in an effort to finally ascertain exactly what made the Paramount brass decide to give the Fleischers the go-ahead to make the feature. And the answer was surprising. Back to this plot that Olive's digs. Her posture is so unprincess-like with her legs kicking. She's like a teenager reading a fan magazine or something. Salami, salami, bologna. Very famous line, oft-quoted by kids. Salami, salami, bologna. But try to find a delicatessen in Miami. Anyway, oh, well, this is good. The whole field of the frame changes from ruby red to emerald green. Famous use... Famous to use that gag a lot in later cartoons. But of course, it's much better here. Olive needs sunglasses as Popeye is spotlit by the diamond's glare.
That must be Prince Aladdin. Oh, be still my fluttering heart.
Dropped hanky here.
Oh, boy, the princess.
The horse, I must say, the horse... You know, famous, it's like, it must be said, the horse is not that well animated. I mean, compared to what Disney was doing at this point, you know, incorporating natural animal movement into the caricature, but of course it doesn't have to be that great for this. It's just a different animal. No pun intended.
I better get rid of the sticker. She'll think I'm a little cut.
Now, this courtship scene is interesting, and there's a biographical element to it that I'll get to later. First of all, let's look at this nice layout with the full moon and the castle. Very nice. Popeye anxiously rocking on his heels. The biographical element is, well, let's listen to some of this first. It's a repeat of the color gags, really.
I don't know what to say. I never made love in Technicolor before. I don't know.
I never made love in Technicolor before, he says. That's really one of the best ad-libs ever. Willst thou, won't thou, of Jack Mercer. What are you, a thee or a thou? But anyway, the Jack Mercer, nice take there, and Margie Hines got married in Miami right when this film was made. So this courtship scene, I mean, I don't know how athletic Jack Mercer was. I don't know if he actually did somersaults of joy like Popeye, but this is actually a biographical note.
Oh, don't forget to come back.
Heidi-ho, Silver. Away.
Nice angles. You see, this is, I mean, it's camera angles start getting richer at this point, and it keeps happening. It happens progressively through the picture. The angles get more radical, and the editing gets more and more intense, and it really builds to a crescendo.
The lamp.
Ah, there's the lamp eyeball shot. Nice angle. And a cloak out. Now here's Olive calling, attendants, attend me. Ah, toenail painting with maximum efficiency. I didn't know they had those back then. I don't know if they have them now.
Oh, see if you can help that poor man, then send him away.
This new lamps for old thing that we're hearing here. You see the vizier imitating one of those street vendors with the wooden carts, and there's a whole talker tune with Betty Boop and Bimbo as one of those street vendors, Any Rags years ago. And it was a real New York thing, those people with the wooden carts. That wasn't, a flashlight, an amusing anachronism. That Olive Oil was a witty scriptwriter, let me tell you.
It's mine.
Yes, he's got the lamp. And here's a gag which also reminds me of old Betty Boop stuff. Doesn't this gag in the old 1933 Fleischer version of Snow White with evil twins? Something like it, at any rate. You notice they start building up the crowd scenes. I think, the clever thing about this movie, they save all their spectacle for the end. There's a lamp wipe, but there's more ink and paint suddenly. There's more characters. It's like crowd scenes, and it builds. The angles are fat. Look at that, big crowd. It really builds. And now Popeye does the illusion. Yeah, it's like the man who came back.
Ah, no one here. Now's my chance. The princess shall soon be mine.
The lamp is in enemy hands. Genie eating ice cream, caught unawares. Now, the genie receives much harsher treatment with the villain than he does with Popeye, and I have the feeling the Wazir will live to regret that. Much the same thing happened to the Jim Backus villain years later. You must be kind to your genie. Now, it's amazing how things take a turn for the worse. I mean, the speed with which everything takes a turn for the worse in these spectacular shots, but edited so quickly, Things are over for Popeye very quickly. He gets poor again. The badly animated horse disappears, and now Popeye disappears, and, it's like Cinderella or something. The suit goes. Popeye said, "My suit is lost." It's a lawsuit. And, it's amazing. The pace is really increasing. And another amazing thing is how quickly these adoring throngs can turn into an ugly mob. Now, I think this form of capital punishment has been outlawed since this cartoon was made. Cut to a can of spinach. You notice it's intercut. It's intercut. Everything's intercut. And it's like, that's done immediately. He's a tornado. Popeye is tomato. Got the olive, the line. Says, "Help, I'm pent up in this penthouse." Big take, big take. Love the big take. Big zip. Olive's put in the stockade. Now look at this shot. It's like, what is it? 3 seconds, but that whole beautiful layout with him coming up the spiral staircase. It's so fast. You notice the rubbing motifs with the spinach can now. Encounter with guards. Now, this guy could have been in a 1933 Popeye cartoon, but it's incorporated into the montage so quickly.
Yeah, spinach to cook the roaches loose.
Here's a giant bird on the staircase. It's like the Rock, that big bird from the first Popeye two-reeler. But that was part of a 3D effect, and this gets incorporated right into the montage. And furthermore, it's set up by the earlier stove gag. It's built right in, so now the bird's simmering on the stove, rat-tat-tat, and now you get the big dragon coming up so quickly, Again, it's the speed and the construction. Pipe power. Never underestimate it. Now, here's a new wrinkle. The Vizier disappears. Popeye enters. And, that a big take on Popeye. I love the takes. I love the action. Nice take.
Like the brick wall here, Mr. Bigger. You must be a magician.
The superpower the Vizier has now just adds a different dimension to it. Suddenly he's a worthy foe, a worthy adversary for Popeye. Oh, there's the nice flurry effect, the multiple blades of the sword, like Tendler did way back in Choose Your Weapons, also with a sword. Oddly enough, it's a good. Now, I know Tendler animated this scene himself, It's sort of obvious when you look at it, but I'm not that brilliant. I mean, Tendler told me he animated the scene himself. We discussed it. Nice angle on this. But I don't have much time left, so I got to finish my story about my friend, the animation historian and researcher Mark Langer. When we last left him, he was riffling through old internal documents trying to figure out what convinced the Paramount bigwigs that the Fleischers had the chops to make a feature. They had their champions there at the studio, and they had their naysayers, but for some unknown reason, it was a now obscure color classic by Dave Tendler featuring anthropomorphic vegetables called Tears of an Onion that won him over. So the tipping point not only yielded permission to make Gulliver's Travels, but also an Onion sequel called The Fresh Vegetable Mystery, done by Dave Tendler, and gives us further proof that there's no accounting for the brains of studio executives. And I speak from personal experience, which brings us all the way back to the framing device and the film within the film and the fate of olive oil at the studio. The perfect ending, the surprise ending. Olive Oil does the biggest big take of all. She's fired. I know how she feels. And again, I speak from personal experience. Greg Ford, goodbye.